Jacob Turner had always been different. From the time he could remember, he had known that the world looked at him in a way that made him feel small, even invisible. It was not just his quiet nature that set him apart, but the marks life had left on him. A childhood accident had changed his face forever, leaving scars that twisted the shape of his features. Children in the village called him names that echoed cruelly in his ears. The older people whispered behind closed doors, shaking their heads and muttering about the monster who lives alone. At first, Jacob tried to ignore them. He told himself that the world's words could not touch him, but even so, their fear and disgust felt like a cold wind that never stopped blowing. He lived at the edge of the village, in a small house that his father had built decades ago. The walls were sturdy but worn, and the garden outside had grown wild over the years. Flowers bloomed in messy clusters, and the grass swayed tall and untamed. Jacob liked it that way. He liked the freedom of a garden that did not ask for perfection, where he could tend plants without someone judging his work. There, he could feel some sense of control, some peace in a world that often felt harsh and unforgiving. Jacob's days began before the sun rose. He would wake in the dim light of dawn, dress in simple clothes, and step outside to start his work. His hands, though scarred and rough from years of labor, were strong and skilled. He worked as a carpenter, crafting tables, chairs, and small furniture for the villagers who dared to ask for his help. Despite the whispers and glances, some people recognized that his work was careful, precise, and beautiful. Yet even those who admired him kept their distance, offering polite words without warmth, as if their eyes feared the sight of him more than they valued the kindness in his heart. Jacob did not mind. He had learned long ago that loneliness, though heavy, could be comforting. It allowed him to move through the world without worry about judgment, gossip, or disappointment. Yet in the quiet moments, when the house was empty and the wind rustled through the garden, he felt a loneliness deeper than any physical ache. He wondered if anyone would ever see past the scars, past the quiet exterior, to the person who had always dreamed, hoped, and longed like anyone else. The village itself was small, the kind of place where everyone knew each other's business, whether they wanted to or not. Streets were lined with low cottages, shops with wooden signs swinging in the breeze, and a small market where neighbors gathered each morning. Life here moved slowly, and change was often met with suspicion. Jacob's home, at the far end of the village, became a symbol of fear rather than fascination. People whispered about his strange habits, the way he would hum softly while working, or the way he sometimes spoke to the animals he rescued. Strange, unusual, and frightening. That was how they described him, and over time, those whispers grew into a reputation that weighed on him like a stone in his chest. Despite the rumors, Jacob was not without compassion. Many animals found refuge in his home. Stray dogs and cats, injured birds, and even a fox or two had been given food, shelter, and care by his hands. He never asked for recognition, never sought praise. He found joy in the quiet moments of life. The warmth of sunlight on his skin, the smell of fresh wood shavings, the sound of birdsong outside his window. These small pleasures were his treasure. Yet he could not escape the persistent feeling that the village would never truly accept him. Jacob's relationship with the villagers was complicated. Some older women would send small notes of thanks when he repaired furniture for them, leaving them at the doorstep with a simple "thank you." The children, however, were another story. They would run away at the sight of him, laughing cruelly, repeating the nicknames they had invented for him. "Monster!" they would shout, even from across the street. Jacob never responded, never yelled back. He had learned that anger only fueled fear, and fear was what people clung to so desperately. Instead, he kept moving, kept working, kept living, hoping that perhaps one day someone would look at him and see the person behind the scars. Then, one morning, everything began to change. Eleanor arrived in the village carrying a suitcase and a quiet determination. She was a widow, recently bereaved, moving from another town in search of a fresh start. Her hair was dark and often caught in the wind, her eyes soft yet filled with strength. Eleanor had known loss and it had left its mark, but it had also given her a sense of courage that others often lacked. She rented the small cottage near the village center and began to explore the surroundings. Unlike the villagers, she did not shy away from curiosity. She watched, listened, and tried to understand the rhythms of this small community. Eleanor first noticed Jacob one afternoon while walking through the market. He was helping an elderly man carry sacks of grain to his home. His movements were careful and deliberate, his voice low but calm as he reassured the man that the load was safe. Eleanor felt something stir inside her, a recognition of quiet strength and unspoken kindness. It was not the face the villagers whispered about that captured her attention, but the care in his hands, the gentleness in his eyes, and the dignity in the way he moved. Days passed, and Eleanor's awareness of Jacob grew. She noticed him repairing fences for neighbors, offering help without asking for payment. She saw the stray animals that followed him, trusting him completely. People watched these acts of kindness and suspicion remained, but Eleanor saw beyond the fear. She saw a man who had lived a life of quiet struggle, whose heart remained unbroken despite the world's cruelty. Jacob, meanwhile, noticed Eleanor as well. He was wary at first. Years of isolation had taught him to expect judgment, not understanding. Yet there was something different about her. She did not flinch when she saw him. She did not whisper or turn away. She simply observed as though she were trying to understand, not to condemn. For the first time in a long while, Jacob felt a flicker of hope, a sense that perhaps there might be someone in the world who would see him as he truly was. That evening, Jacob returned home to his garden, tending to the plants with careful attention. The sun dipped low, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. He paused for a moment, looking at the flowers swaying in the breeze. Life had always been quiet, almost painfully so, but there was beauty in it, and in that beauty, he found comfort. Yet, as the shadows lengthened, a thought lingered in his mind. Could someone truly accept him? Could someone see past the scars, past the fear, and reach for the humanity within him? He did not know. But somewhere in the distance he sensed that his life was on the verge of change. A woman had arrived who did not see him as the village saw him, who might, in her quiet way, reach out and touch the part of him that had been left untouched for so long. Jacob did not yet understand the journey that lay ahead, but for the first time in many years, he felt a tiny spark of something he had not felt in a long time: hope. And so, the stage was set. Jacob Turner, the man they called a monster, continued his quiet life at the edge of the village, unaware that soon his world would shift in ways he could never have imagined. The winds of change had begun to blow, and with them the possibility of understanding, compassion, and perhaps even love was taking root in the most unexpected of places. Life in the village continued with its usual rhythm, but something subtle began to shift. Eleanor's presence had not gone unnoticed. People whispered about the new widow in town, the woman who walked with a quiet confidence and who seemed unafraid of anyone or anything. Yet her interest in Jacob Turner puzzled the villagers the most. They had labeled him a monster for so long that the thought of someone approaching him without fear seemed impossible. For them, it was almost as if Eleanor were breaking some unspoken rule of the village. Jacob noticed her curiosity, too. At first, he thought she might be like the others, someone who would stare, whisper, and then tell stories about him behind his back. But Eleanor was different. She did not flinch when she saw him at the market or crossed the street when he walked by. She simply observed, her eyes calm and steady, as though she were trying to understand rather than judge. That alone made Jacob uneasy in a strange way. He was not used to being seen like this, not for what he did or who he was, but simply for being himself. One morning, Eleanor wandered near the edge of the village, where Jacob's small home and wild garden stood. She carried a basket of fresh bread she had baked, intending to leave it as a small gesture for the neighbors. When she arrived, she noticed Jacob outside, carefully repairing a broken wooden fence. He hummed softly to himself as he worked, muscles moving with quiet precision, hands steady despite the roughness of the wood. The sunlight caught the lines of his face, highlighting the scars that so many others had feared. For a moment, Eleanor paused, unsure whether to call out or simply observe. Something in the way he moved, in the care he took with the fence, made her heart tighten. There was a gentleness in his work that contradicted the fear that the villagers carried in their eyes. Without thinking, she stepped closer and said softly, "Good morning." Jacob froze. He had been so accustomed to solitude that any interruption startled him. Slowly he looked up, meeting her gaze for the first time. There was no fear in her eyes, no disgust, only curiosity and warmth. His voice caught in his throat before he finally managed a low, hesitant, "Good morning?" Eleanor smiled, offering the bread she had brought. "I thought you might like this. I baked too much today." Her gesture was simple, but it carried something far deeper, an acknowledgement of his humanity, a recognition that he was not the monster the village claimed he was. Jacob hesitated. He had grown used to rejection and suspicion, to the weight of a reputation built on fear and misunderstanding. Accepting kindness felt strange, almost foreign. Yet he did not step back. Slowly, he reached out and took the basket from her hands. There was a flicker of something in his eyes, a spark of gratitude, mixed with disbelief that someone could approach him with no fear, no hesitation. Over the following days, Eleanor made a habit of visiting the edge of the village. Sometimes she carried bread, sometimes small vegetables from her garden, or even simple trinkets she thought he might like. Jacob continued his work quietly, never asking for anything, never speaking more than necessary. Yet he began to look forward to these small encounters. Eleanor's presence brought a light into his life he had not realized he had been missing. However, not everyone in the village shared Eleanor's open-mindedness. The whispers grew louder. "Why is she spending time with him?" people asked. "Doesn't she see what he looks like?" Mothers pulled their children closer when Jacob passed by, fearing that even a glance might scar their innocence. Even the shopkeepers, who once tolerated Jacob's quiet business, watched with suspicion, wondering if Eleanor's kindness would somehow bring trouble. Eleanor noticed the change in the villagers' behavior. It did not bother her. She had lived through loss and hardship, and fear did not guide her actions. She understood that Jacob was not like anyone else in the village. He was quiet, reserved, and misunderstood, but he had a depth that few people could see. That depth drew her closer, not only out of curiosity, but also out of admiration for his resilience. One afternoon, a sudden commotion erupted in the village square. A cart carrying supplies had broken down, spilling sacks of grain onto the cobblestones. Villagers rushed to clear the mess, shouting instructions and arguing over who should do what. Jacob, hearing the commotion, set down his tools and moved toward the square. Despite the whispers and stares, he worked calmly, lifting heavy sacks and helping children safely out of the way. Eleanor watched from the edge of the square, her heart swelling with a mix of pride and relief. She had seen this side of Jacob before, the quiet strength that others overlooked, but seeing him in action in the midst of chaos was different. He moved with purpose and care, and even the children who had once feared him began to take notice, though many still kept their distance. When the work was done, Jacob quietly returned to his home without seeking acknowledgement or thanks, but Eleanor approached him, her eyes bright. "You were incredible," she said softly. "You helped everyone without even thinking about yourself." Jacob looked at her, a faint blush rising in his cheeks. Compliments were not something he was used to receiving. "I just did what I could," he murmured, brushing his hands against his pants as if to erase the attention. Eleanor laughed softly, a sound that felt warm and comforting. "It's more than most people would do," she said. "Most would have run away or argued. You care." For the first time in years, Jacob felt seen, not just noticed, but truly seen. He did not need her to say more. Her words alone, her acknowledgement, were enough to remind him that kindness existed in the world, even in places where fear and judgment seemed dominant. The days turned into weeks, and their quiet friendship grew. Eleanor would often visit Jacob in the early morning, sometimes to chat about small things, gardening, cooking, or the animals he cared for. At other times, she simply sat quietly beside him, watching him work, listening to the soft hum of his voice or the occasional sigh as he tended to his garden. These moments, simple as they were, began to build trust, breaking down walls that Jacob had erected over decades of fear and isolation. Yet despite their growing bond, the village continued to watch and whisper. Some people tried to warn Eleanor, telling her she was making a mistake, that she should stay away from Jacob. They spoke of danger and unpredictability, of how appearances often concealed inner darkness. But Eleanor did not listen. She had learned that judgment often came from fear rather than truth. She had lost too much in life to let rumors dictate her actions. If anything, she felt that Jacob deserved someone who saw him without fear, someone who could help him believe in the goodness of the world again. One chilly evening, Eleanor found Jacob sitting by the garden, feeding a small stray cat that had followed him for weeks. The sun was setting, painting the sky in soft shades of orange and pink. She sat down beside him, careful not to startle him. "You've built so much here," she said, her voice gentle. "Not just the garden, not just the fence. You've built something in yourself too. Something strong." Jacob looked at her, uncertainty in his eyes. "Strong? I don't know if I am," he admitted quietly. "The village? They've never seen me as strong. They only see—" He trailed off, unable to find the words. "They see fear," Eleanor finished softly. "Not who you are, but I do. I see you." Her words hung in the air, simple yet profound. Jacob felt a warmth spread through him, a feeling he had not experienced in years. For the first time, he realized that not everyone would judge him, that not all eyes would look at him with fear or disgust. Eleanor's trust, her courage to see him as he truly was, became a small light in his otherwise shadowed world. From that moment, their bond deepened. Jacob began to allow himself small gestures of trust, offering her a seat when she visited, sharing moments of silence without discomfort, even allowing her to touch the flowers he tended with such care. Eleanor, in turn, respected his boundaries, never pushing, always observing, always understanding. In the village, life continued with its usual rhythms, but something had shifted. People began to notice the quiet friendship between Jacob and Eleanor. While many still whispered and feared what they did not understand, a few began to watch more closely, seeing Jacob not as a monster, but as a man capable of kindness, strength, and quiet heroism. And so, the days passed with small moments of connection and understanding. Jacob continued his work, tending to his garden, caring for the animals, and quietly helping the villagers in ways no one always saw. Eleanor remained by his side, a steady presence of warmth and courage, slowly helping him believe that the world might not be as cruel as he had always feared. Little did Jacob know, the calm before the storm was ending. Life had a way of testing hearts, of revealing true character in unexpected moments. But with Eleanor by his side, he began to sense that maybe, just maybe, he could face the world without fear for the first time in his life. Life in the village had settled into a quiet routine, but Jacob Turner knew that peace was often fragile. Even with Eleanor's presence offering comfort, the whispers of the villagers still lingered in the corners of his mind. Every glance, every sideways look, reminded him that he was not fully accepted. Though he tried to ignore it, he could not escape the feeling that one day something would happen to test him, something that would force the village to reveal the true depth of their fear or their courage. That day came sooner than he expected. It began with a simple morning, the kind of morning when the sun rises slowly over the hills, casting golden light on the cobblestone streets. Jacob was tending to the garden near his home, hands buried in the soil, planting seedlings he hoped would bloom into flowers by summer. The quiet was comforting, broken only by the occasional chirp of birds or the rustle of leaves in the breeze. Eleanor had come by with a basket of fresh bread, smiling as she admired the neat rows of plants that were beginning to grow. "Everything looks so healthy," she said softly, kneeling to inspect a tiny sprout. "You really have a gift, Jacob." Jacob shrugged, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "I just try to care for what's here," he murmured. "It's not about gifts." Eleanor laughed lightly, brushing soil from her fingers. "Maybe it is. Caring is a gift, after all." Their peaceful moment was shattered by a loud commotion from the village square. Voices shouted over each other, sharp and panicked, and the sound of running feet echoed through the streets. Jacob froze, instinctively aware that something serious was happening. He could see smoke rising in the distance, curling into the sky like a warning. Without hesitation, he left the garden behind, moving toward the chaos with purpose. Eleanor followed, worry etched across her face. "Jacob, wait! Do you have to go?" she called, her voice almost lost in the clamor. "I have to help," he replied simply. "Someone will need me." By the time they reached the square, the scene was chaotic. A fire had broken out in one of the village workshops, and flames licked the wooden walls, threatening to spread to nearby homes. Villagers ran in panic, some carrying buckets of water, others shouting instructions, while many simply watched, frozen in fear. Children cried, clutching their parents' hands, unsure of what to do. Jacob's heart pounded, but not from fear. He had always known that action mattered more than hesitation. He rushed forward, lifting heavy buckets of water, directing people to form lines to douse the flames. His movements were efficient and calm, a stark contrast to the panic around him. Even the children who had once avoided him now watched in awe, realizing that the man they had feared for so long was now saving their homes, their belongings, and perhaps even their lives. Eleanor stayed close, helping where she could, carrying water and offering comfort to frightened villagers. But she noticed something else. Glances filled with suspicion and fear, aimed at Jacob even as he worked tirelessly. People hesitated to take orders from him, hesitant to trust someone they had always labeled a monster. Yet, despite their doubts, Jacob's determination never wavered. He lifted, carried, and guided with the strength and precision that had defined his quiet life, knowing that every second mattered. The fire roared higher, and suddenly a cry rang out. One of the children had wandered too close to the flames, trapped behind a stack of burning wood. Jacob did not hesitate. He sprinted through the smoke, the heat singeing his face, the crowd parting as he reached the child. Scooping the little one into his arms, he ran back toward safety, ignoring the searing sting of heat on his skin. The villagers gasped, some in fear, some in disbelief, as Jacob emerged from the smoke, the child safe in his arms. Eleanor's heart raced as she watched him. "You're incredible," she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. No one else would have dared. Jacob, breathing heavily, handed the child to their mother, nodding briefly before turning back to the flames. "It's what needs to be done," he said simply. There was no boastfulness in his tone, no desire for recognition. He simply acted because he could, because someone had to. As the fire was finally brought under control, the villagers stood in stunned silence. The damage had been contained, thanks to the quick thinking and bravery of one man who had spent years living on the edge of society, feared and misunderstood. Some villagers approached Jacob cautiously, offering murmured thanks, though their eyes betrayed lingering doubt and fear. Others avoided him entirely, unwilling to confront their own assumptions. Eleanor, however, stepped forward, taking Jacob's hand in hers. "You saved lives today," she said, her voice steady. "And yet, some people still look at you as if you're dangerous." "I don't understand it." Jacob looked at her, exhaustion etched on his face. "It doesn't matter what they think," he murmured. "I did what I could." "But it should matter," Eleanor said softly. "People should see you for who you are, not what they fear. You showed them courage today. You deserve more than whispers and fear." Her words struck something deep within Jacob. For years he had lived in the shadow of judgment, believing that no one could truly see him. And yet here was Eleanor, standing beside him, acknowledging not just his actions, but his character. For the first time, he felt that someone recognized him as more than the scars he carried, more than the rumors that haunted him. That night, as the village settled into uneasy quiet, Jacob returned home, exhausted but fulfilled. He tended to the small injuries from the fire, bandaging his hands and cleaning soot from his face. The house felt emptier than usual without Eleanor, and he found himself wishing she were there, sharing the silence and the comfort of her presence. Eleanor, meanwhile, could not stop thinking about the day's events. She had witnessed the villagers' fear, their hesitation to accept someone different, and she had seen the bravery and kindness that Jacob embodied. She understood that change would not come easily. People often clung to fear because it was easier than understanding. But she also believed that courage, both hers and Jacob's, could slowly open their hearts. Over the next few days, the aftermath of the fire created a ripple of tension in the village. Some neighbors approached Jacob, apologizing for their previous treatment, offering assistance to repair the damaged workshop. Others remained distant, whispering behind closed doors, unwilling to confront the truth of their own prejudices. Jacob accepted help quietly, never boasting, never holding grudges, though he could feel the subtle shift in attitudes. Eleanor continued to visit him, bringing meals, helping with repairs, and simply offering companionship. The bond between them deepened, built not on words alone, but on shared experiences, mutual respect, and the understanding that true courage often meant standing firm in the face of fear. Jacob began to realize that Eleanor's trust and acceptance were not fleeting. They were genuine. She saw him, not as the village saw him, but as he truly was, a man capable of strength, compassion, and resilience. But the conflict within the village was far from resolved. Some people, unwilling to face their own fears, began to stir resentment. Gossip spread, fueled by old prejudices and new uncertainty. "Why does she trust him?" they whispered. "Why does she act as if he is one of us?" These questions, though unspoken to Jacob or Eleanor directly, created an undercurrent of tension that threatened to erupt at any moment. One evening, as the sun dipped below the hills and painted the sky in soft shades of pink and gold, Jacob sat in his garden, reflecting on the events of the past week. The fire, the children, the villagers' reactions, all of it weighed heavily on his mind. He realized that bravery was not just about action, it was also about enduring judgment, fear, and misunderstanding. Eleanor's presence had made that burden lighter, but he knew that he could not control the village's perceptions. He could only act with integrity, guided by his own sense of right and wrong. Eleanor joined him, settling beside him on the edge of the garden. She did not speak immediately, letting the quiet stretch between them. Finally, she said softly, "You did what needed to be done today. And even if some people still fear you, you showed them something they can't ignore. Your heart." Jacob looked at her, the weight of exhaustion and relief mingling in his gaze. "I'm not sure they'll ever see me the way you do," he admitted. "They're too afraid of what they don't understand." "Then they will have to learn," Eleanor replied firmly. "And if they refuse, it doesn't matter. You have me, and I see you. That's what counts." Her words sank deep, planting a seed of hope in Jacob's heart. For the first time, he realized that acceptance did not have to come from everyone, only from those who mattered, and perhaps, slowly, the courage of a few could inspire change in the many. And so, the village remained a place of whispers and fear. But within the quiet corner where Jacob lived, a different story was unfolding, a story of trust, courage, and the possibility that even in the face of misunderstanding, humanity could prevail. The days following the fire were filled with quiet tension. The villagers continued their routines, but the atmosphere had shifted in subtle ways. Some looked at Jacob with curiosity rather than fear, though many still avoided him entirely. It was a strange limbo, neither full acceptance nor outright rejection, and Jacob felt the weight of it every time he stepped into the village. Yet, through it all, Eleanor remained a constant, unwavering presence. Her support gave him courage, even when the whispers and sideways glances threatened to overwhelm him. One morning, news arrived that would change everything. A landslide had blocked the road leading to a neighboring town, trapping several families in their homes and cutting off vital supplies. Panic spread quickly, and the village council gathered to discuss what could be done. Many were hesitant, unsure who could handle the task. The path to the stranded families was treacherous, filled with loose rocks and slippery mud. Fear held them back, but Eleanor's eyes, filled with determination, turned toward Jacob. "You can do this," she said quietly but firmly. "You know the land. You're strong, careful. You can help them." Jacob felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. He had always lived quietly, helping where he could without recognition. But this was different. People were counting on him. Children were counting on him. Families, people who feared him, who had labeled him a monster, needed him to act. For a long moment he hesitated. Doubt whispered in his mind. What if they are right? What if my strength isn't enough? But then he thought of Eleanor and the faces of the people trapped, and he knew that fear could not guide him now. Without another word, he set out, Eleanor by his side. The journey to the landslide was slow and difficult. The path wound steeply through hills, the ground slippery from recent rains. Jacob moved with careful precision, testing each step before committing his weight. Eleanor followed closely, offering what assistance she could, but trusting Jacob's judgment. Villagers watched them leave, some with admiration, others with lingering suspicion. Few had ever seen Jacob move with such purpose and confidence, and even fewer had seen him paired with someone who trusted him completely. As they approached the site, the scale of the disaster became clear. Mud and rocks had blocked the path entirely, and houses below were precariously close to being cut off from help. Families shouted from the safety of their porches, waving their hands for attention. Children clung to their parents, terrified by the noise and the instability around them. Jacob's heart ached for them, but he forced himself to remain calm, knowing that panic would accomplish nothing. He began directing the rescue, instructing villagers who had followed cautiously behind them on where to place ropes, how to move debris, and how to carry children safely. His voice was firm but calm, carrying authority without arrogance. Slowly, with sweat on their brows and determination in their eyes, the group began clearing the path. Rocks were moved, mud shifted, and small passages created for families to escape. Every step was dangerous, but Jacob's careful guidance ensured that no one was hurt. Eleanor stayed close, offering encouragement, handing water to the workers and comforting frightened children. At one point, a young boy lost his footing near a slippery rock. Jacob reacted instantly, catching him before he fell, holding him close until the child's tears subsided. Eleanor watched in awe, realizing once again that Jacob's courage was not loud or boastful. It was steady, deliberate, and selfless. As the rescue continued, word of Jacob's bravery began to spread through the village. People who had avoided him now watched, some with growing respect, others with reluctant admiration. Rumors whispered in the shadows transformed into conversations of wonder. "Did you see how he carried that boy?" someone asked. "He didn't hesitate. He didn't even flinch." Another voice replied, "All this time, we judged him without knowing. He's remarkable." Despite the praise, Jacob remained focused on the task at hand. Eleanor noticed a change in him, a quiet determination that went beyond mere duty. He was no longer just helping out of habit. He was leading, guiding, and protecting. He had become the calm in the storm, the one people could trust even when fear threatened to take over. Eleanor felt pride swell in her chest. She had known his heart, had seen his courage long before anyone else, and now the world was beginning to catch up. Hours passed, and the final family was safely escorted from their home. Exhaustion weighed heavily on everyone, but relief washed over them in equal measure. The villagers who had once whispered now approached Jacob, their faces softened with gratitude and newfound respect. Some struggled to find words, while others simply nodded, offering small gestures of thanks. For the first time in years, Jacob felt that perhaps acceptance was possible, not just from one person, but from many. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Jacob and Eleanor stood together at the top of the hill, overlooking the rescued families below. He was covered in mud and sweat, his hands scratched and bruised, yet there was a calmness in his eyes that had not been there before. Eleanor took his hand gently, her fingers intertwining with his. "You did it," she said softly. "You saved them all, and you did it with such courage, such care." Jacob shook his head, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "I just did what was needed," he murmured. "Anyone else could have done it too." Eleanor turned to him, her eyes shining. "No, Jacob, not anyone else. You see what others can't. You act when others hesitate. You don't let fear control you. That's why they followed you today, why they trusted you. That's why they're beginning to see who you really are." Jacob looked out over the village. The families safe and smiling, children laughing despite the fear they had felt earlier. He realized that Eleanor was right. Today was not just about the rescue. It was about showing the village that courage, kindness, and humanity were not always loud or obvious. They could live quietly, steadily, and still make a world of difference. That evening, as they walked back toward Jacob's home, Eleanor squeezed his hand gently. "You've changed things today," she said. "Not just for them, but for you too. You've shown them who you are, and you've shown me everything I hoped you would be." Jacob's heart swelled with emotion. For the first time, he felt that he was not defined by the scars on his face or the fears of others. He was defined by his actions, by the choices he made, and by the courage he carried within him. And with Eleanor by his side, he felt that he could face anything. The next morning, the village began to shift in ways Jacob could hardly have imagined. People who had once avoided him now approached with cautious smiles. Children, once terrified, waved or called out greetings. Even the elders, who had whispered judgments for years, began to nod with respect when Jacob passed by. Acceptance was not universal, but it was growing. Slowly, the world that had once feared him was beginning to recognize his worth. Eleanor, walking beside him through the streets, whispered, "You did more than save lives, Jacob. You've started to change hearts, too." Jacob squeezed her hand, a quiet sense of fulfillment filling him. "I only did what I had to do," he said. "But maybe you're right. Maybe things can be different now." That night, as he sat by the fire in his small home, Jacob reflected on the journey that had brought him here. From the days of whispers and fear to the moments of courage and trust, he realized that change was never easy. It required action, persistence, and the courage to face not just the dangers of the world, but the judgment of those around him. And in Eleanor he had found the companion who understood this truth, who believed in him when few others did. As he closed his eyes that night, a sense of calm settled over him. The world had tested him, and he had passed. He was no longer just the man the village feared. He was Jacob Turner, the man who faced danger, who showed courage, and who had been seen for the first time in his life. And with Eleanor by his side, he knew that the best chapters of his life were still ahead. The days after the rescue were filled with a quiet transformation in the village. Jacob Turner, once whispered about and feared, began to see small changes around him. People who had avoided him before now nodded in greeting, some offering tentative smiles. Children waved as he walked past, curiosity replacing the fear that had once dominated their young minds. Even the elders, who had long disapproved of his presence in the village, began to show respect, acknowledging his courage and quiet strength. The world had not fully changed overnight, but Jacob felt a shift in the air, a sense that hearts and minds could learn to look beyond appearances, to see the person rather than the scars. Eleanor remained his constant companion. Their bond, built through shared experiences of challenge and understanding, had grown stronger each day. She no longer visited simply as a friend offering kindness. She walked beside him as an equal, a partner in both life and action. The villagers had begun to notice their closeness, not with suspicion, but with a hesitant acceptance that perhaps there was more to Jacob than fear could ever reveal. Jacob found himself reflecting on the long years of isolation he had endured. For decades he had moved through life quietly, careful not to draw attention, careful not to provoke judgment. He had grown used to the loneliness, finding comfort in routine and in the small joys of tending his garden, caring for the animals, and crafting furniture with patient hands. Yet he had always wondered if someone could ever truly see him, could look past the scars and hear the heart within. Eleanor had answered that question. She had seen him, fully and without fear, and in doing so, she had changed the trajectory of his life. One morning, as they walked through the village together, they passed the repaired workshop that had been damaged in the landslide rescue. Villagers lingered nearby, working on repairs, their faces a mixture of gratitude and admiration. A small group of children ran ahead, carrying bundles of flowers to leave at Jacob's home. He knelt to receive them, surprised and touched by their gesture. The flowers were wild and uneven, just as he liked them, and they reminded him that beauty could flourish even in imperfect places. "See?" Eleanor whispered beside him. "They're beginning to understand. You've made them see what matters, not just what they feared." Jacob smiled, feeling a warmth he had not known for years. "I hope so," he said softly, "but I know it will take time. People often cling to what they know, even when it is wrong." Eleanor nodded, her hand brushing against his. "Then we give them time, and we continue to show them who you are, every day. The following weeks were marked by small but meaningful changes. Villagers began seeking Jacob's advice on repairs, bringing their furniture to him for crafting, and even asking for his help with problems that required steady hands and careful judgment. The whispers of fear that had once followed him began to fade, replaced with quiet conversations about his courage, his skill, and his compassion. Children no longer avoided him. They came to him with questions, curious about the animals he cared for, the garden he tended, and the furniture he crafted. Jacob, in turn, welcomed their curiosity, answering patiently and gently, teaching them not just skills, but lessons in patience, empathy, and understanding. Eleanor continued to support him, often standing quietly at his side, allowing Jacob to lead while providing encouragement and comfort. Together, they became a quiet force in the village, not one of loud authority but of steady example. Their partnership was unassuming, yet it changed the way people viewed what strength, courage, and kindness truly meant. One afternoon, the village council approached Jacob with a proposal. They had noticed the way he had acted during the fire and the landslide rescue, and they wanted to formally recognize his contributions. While Jacob had never sought recognition, he understood the importance of acceptance in the hearts of the villagers. Hesitant at first, he agreed, knowing that it might help bridge the gap between him and the community that had once feared him. During the ceremony, the villagers gathered around, their eyes filled with a mixture of admiration and respect. The mayor spoke first, acknowledging Jacob's bravery, his selflessness, and his quiet strength. Families who had once avoided him stepped forward, offering gestures of thanks, and children presented him with handmade gifts and drawings. Jacob accepted it all with humility, his heart swelling with gratitude not for the recognition, but for the acknowledgement that he had finally been seen for who he truly was. Eleanor stood beside him, her hand resting on his arm. When the ceremony ended, she whispered, "You've done more than anyone could have imagined. They see you now, not the monster they thought you were, but the man you've always been." Jacob turned to her, his eyes filled with emotion. "I never thought this day would come," he admitted. "I never thought anyone would see me like you do." "You don't have to imagine anymore," Eleanor replied softly. "You are seen, and you are loved for who you are, not for what they feared you to be." In the months that followed, Jacob's life became a blend of work, companionship, and quiet joy. The garden flourished under his care, the animals thrived, and the village slowly embraced him as one of their own. He continued his carpentry, creating furniture not just for the village, but also for those in neighboring towns who had heard of his skill and kindness. Yet he remained humble, never boasting, never seeking attention, content to let his actions speak for themselves. Eleanor and Jacob's relationship grew deeper with each passing day. They shared quiet moments in the garden, walked together through the village, and supported each other in both work and life. Their bond was rooted in mutual respect, understanding, and a shared belief in the goodness that could exist in the world. Even in the face of fear and judgment, Jacob had learned to trust again, to open his heart, and to embrace life fully, lessons that Eleanor had gently guided him toward. One evening, as they sat together on a hill overlooking the village, the sun casting golden light over the rooftops, Jacob reflected on his journey. From the years of isolation and whispers of fear to the days of courage and quiet heroism, he realized that his life had been transformed not by luck, but by the choices he had made and the people who had chosen to see him clearly. "I never imagined it would be like this," he said softly, watching the villagers below. "I always thought I would be alone, feared, forgotten." "You were never truly alone," Eleanor replied, her hand resting on his. "You had strength, courage, and a heart that never gave up. And you had me. We found each other when we needed each other most. Jacob smiled, a sense of peace settling over him. Yes, he said, we did. And somehow, the world has begun to see what I've always known. That fear is nothing compared to kindness, and courage can change hearts. The village continued to grow and thrive, shaped in small but significant ways by Jacob's presence. People who had once feared him learned to embrace difference, understanding that appearances could be deceiving and that true character was revealed in actions, not rumors. Children who had once run in fright now sought his guidance, learning lessons in empathy, courage, and perseverance. And Jacob, once called a monster, had become a symbol of quiet strength, resilience, and hope. Eleanor and Jacob's life together was simple, yet rich with meaning. They continued their daily routines, caring for the garden, the animals, and the village in their own quiet way. Their bond, built through trials and understanding, remained unshakable. They laughed together, shared quiet meals, and supported one another through life's challenges, knowing that the world could still be harsh, but that together they could face anything. One afternoon, as they sat under the shade of a large tree in Jacob's garden, Eleanor reached for his hand. "Look at what we've built together," she said softly. "Not just the garden or the village, but this, us. And all because we chose to see each other, to trust, to be brave." Jacob nodded, squeezing her hand gently. "It's more than I ever dreamed," he admitted. "I never thought someone would look at me without fear. I never thought someone would believe in me like you do." "You are worth believing in," Eleanor said firmly, her eyes shining. "And now, so are the people who once feared you. They've seen you, and they've begun to understand. You've shown them that courage, kindness, and love can overcome fear." As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting warm light over the village, Jacob felt a profound sense of contentment. He had faced fear, endured isolation, and proven his worth not just to the village but to himself. With Eleanor by his side, he knew that life would continue to bring challenges, but he was no longer afraid. He had found acceptance, trust, and love, the things he had longed for his entire life. And so Jacob Turner, once called a monster, lived the rest of his days not in fear or solitude, but in quiet joy and purpose. He became a respected member of the village, a teacher to children, a helper to neighbors, and a man who had learned the true power of courage, compassion, and connection. Eleanor and he shared a life filled with understanding, laughter, and unwavering support, proving that even in the darkest of times, light could shine through, and hearts could be changed by kindness, bravery, and love. The village, too, transformed alongside him, learning that labels and appearances could be misleading, and that true humanity was revealed through actions, empathy, and understanding. And in the quiet corners of life, where scars once marked fear, love and acceptance had taken root, blooming brighter than anyone could have imagined,